Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. My name is Jason, and I'm 15 years old. Last month, my parents and my little sister took a trip to Texas, leaving me home alone. At first, I was excited. I thought I could watch all the movies I wanted and eat all the junk food I felt like. But things took a dark turn on a rainy night, one I will never forget. It was Friday evening, and the rain was pouring hard outside. I had spent most of the day playing video games and texting my friends. Around 11 p.m., I decided it was time to sleep. I crawled under the blankets, turned off the lights, and tried to fall asleep, listening to the rain tapping against my window. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a sound downstairs. It sounded like someone's voice talking. At first, I thought maybe my parents had come back earlier than planned, but then I remembered they wouldn't be back until Monday. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding 1,000 miles an hour. The voice was still there, soft and indistinct. Curiosity overcame fear. I got up slowly and walked to my bedroom door. I opened it just a crack and peeked out into the dark hallway. The house was strangely quiet, except for the faint murmur coming from downstairs. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end I decided to investigate. I tiptoed down the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I reached the last step, I stopped to listen. The voice sounded clearer, though I still couldn't make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the living room. I took a deep breath and moved toward the sound, my heart pounding in my ears. Then a loud bang echoed, as if someone had slammed a door. I froze, feeling my blood run cold. I looked carefully down the hallway, and that's when I saw it. At the end of the corridor, a shadowy figure stood perfectly still. It was tall, dressed entirely in black, and its features were hidden by the darkness. I gasped and stumbled backward, my mind spinning. Who was that man? How had he gotten into my house? My first instinct was to run back to my room. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart hammering harder than ever. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer and closer. I rushed into my room, slammed the door, and locked it. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered, and I quickly explained what was happening, my voice breaking with fear. She assured me the police were on the way and told me not to hang up. From my room, I could hear the intruder moving around downstairs. My mind wouldn't stop imagining what he might be planning. After what felt like an eternity, I heard sirens approaching. The intruder must have heard them too, because the noises stopped abruptly. I stayed silent, holding my breath. Minutes later, there was a loud knock at the front door and voices echoed through the house. The police had arrived. I opened my bedroom door cautiously and went downstairs slowly. 2 officers were in the hallway, shining their flashlights around the house. I told them everything that had happened, still trembling. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no trace of the intruder. The front door was unlocked, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if that man had vanished into thin air. The officers took my statement and assured me they would patrol the neighborhood that night. They recommended I stay with a neighbor or a relative until my parents returned, but I refused to leave the house. They promised to stay alert and left me their contact information before they left. I tried to calm down, but the fear wouldn't go away. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure in the shadows, what he wanted, why he had come in. The questions kept circling in my head, but there were no answers. I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, jolting at every creak and every sigh of the house. When morning finally came, I felt a little more relieved, but the memory of that night was still vivid. I called my parents and told them everything. They were in shock and promised to cut their trip short to come back as soon as possible. The following days were total chaos. When they returned, we installed a new security system, and the police continued investigating, but they found no leads. To this day, I don't know who that intruder was or what he wanted. But I know one thing. I will never forget the night I came face to face with the unknown. Before continuing with the next story, if you're here for the first time, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive the next horror stories. Your support is very important. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you for joining us. Story 2. I was 37 years old when I decided to attend my high school reunion. I took a flight to the nearest airport, rented a car, and set off on the 35-mile drive to my hometown. The road cut through a very rural, nearly uninhabited area, full of empty fields and silent woods. Driving through that desolate landscape gave me a strange, almost ghostly feeling. About 3 miles before reaching town, I saw someone on the side of the road waving for me to stop. I slowed down, and when I got closer and I recognized the man, it was Jim, an old friend from high school. I hadn't seen him in over 20 years, but he still looked almost the same, just a little older. Jim got into the car and we started talking. We reminisced about old times, laughed about the pranks we used to pull at school, and for a moment it felt like no time had passed. I was glad to see a familiar face after so many years. As we got closer to town, I asked if he wanted to come with me to the VFW to grab a drink. "No, just take me home," Jim replied. I remembered his parents lived a few blocks from my grandmother's house, so I turned in that direction, but he stopped me. "Take me to the outskirts of town," he said. There was a trailer park out that way, so I figured maybe he lived there now. When we reached the turnoff, Jim simply said, "Let me out here. It was good to see you again." Then he opened the door, got out of the car, and disappeared into the darkness. I continued driving to the VFW and met up with several of my old classmates. We were chatting about who would be attending the reunion when, at some point, I mentioned that I had just picked up Jim 3 miles east of town and dropped him off near the road. Suddenly, the whole mood changed. Everyone went silent. Even the man singing karaoke set the microphone aside. My cousin, who was sitting next to me, turned pale as a sheet. "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago," someone said. "He rolled his car. We all went to his funeral." I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. Dizziness washed over me, and I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I mumbled something about stepping outside for air and headed to the parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm down. Then I noticed there was a newspaper on the passenger seat. I picked it up, and my heart nearly stopped. It was the local paper printed 8 years earlier, and on the front page was Jim's obituary. I stared at it, unable to believe it, my hands shaking. The article confirmed what my classmates had told me. Jim had died in a car accident, right on that very curve on the outskirts of town. The text described how he lost control of the car and went into a ditch. He died instantly. I didn't know what to think. I had just seen him. I had talked to him. I had given him a ride. How was it possible that he was dead? My mind kept spinning, trying to find a logical explanation. I needed to know more, so I decided to visit his parents' house the next day. The next morning, I drove there and knocked on the door. Jim's mother answered. She looked older and worn out, with sadness still reflected in her eyes. I introduced myself and told her what had happened the night before. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she invited me inside. With a trembling voice, she explained that since Jim's death, many people claimed to have seen him wandering around town, almost always near the place where the accident happened. Some thought it was imagination, but others believed Jim's spirit hadn't been able to rest. I asked if she had experienced anything herself. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Sometimes I feel his presence in the house," she said. "I hear his favorite song playing on the radio, even though it's turned off. It's as if he's still here, watching over us." I left her house with a mix of sadness and confusion. That night I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about Jim and that strange encounter. I wondered if he had wanted to tell me something, if there was some reason he had appeared to me. A few days later, the reunion ended and I had to go back home. As I passed the spot where I had picked him up, I slowed down and looked to both sides. The road was empty, but a chill ran down my spine. I still have that old newspaper with Jim's obituary. I keep it as a reminder of that mysterious night. Every time I think about it, I get the feeling there's more in this world than what we can see or understand. Maybe Jim just wanted to say goodbye, or maybe he had unfinished business. Either way, I will never forget the night I gave my old friend Jim a ride, and realized that sometimes the past is much closer than we imagine. Story 3. I had always been drawn to the idea of camping alone in the woods. The thought of being surrounded by nature, far from the noise and bustle of the city, filled me with excitement. So, one Friday afternoon, I packed my tent, my sleeping bag, and some food, and drove to the edge of the dark forest. I parked the car, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and began my hike deeper into the forest. The sun was still shining brightly when I reached a small clearing, where I decided to set up camp. The trees rose tall and thick, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze, and the birds sang cheerfully. A feeling of absolute peace wrapped around me. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and lit a small campfire. As the sun went down, the forest around me sank into darkness. Night fell, and with it came an unsettling silence. All I could hear was the crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, looking up at the star-filled sky, feeling both alone and full of life. Suddenly, a noise in the bushes snapped me out of that calm. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to think it was probably just an animal. I tried to relax, but the sound continued, growing louder and closer. I sat up, straining my eyes to make out anything beyond the faint glow of the fire. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the bushes. The beam of light revealed only leaves and branches swaying gently in the wind. I let out a shaky breath and tried to convince myself it was a deer or a raccoon. Even so, the unease wouldn't go away. I threw more wood onto the fire and moved a little closer to the flames, hoping the light would scare off any curious animal. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched, but it lingered, making my skin prickle. Every crack, every faint rustle of leaves made my pulse race. Hours passed, and just as I was finally starting to feel sleepy, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, the sound of dry leaves being crushed under human feet. It couldn't be an animal. Fear froze me in place. "Who's there?" I shouted again, my voice echoing through the silent forest. No one answered. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground, gripping it tightly, and stood by the fire with my eyes locked on the darkness. Then I saw it. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, just beyond the reach of the campfire's light. It stood perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me. "What do you want?" I asked, and trying to sound braver than I felt. There was no answer, only silence, broken by the crackling fire. Panic began to take hold of me. I had no idea who that man was or how he had gotten there, but I knew for certain that I had to run. I backed up slowly toward my tent, never taking my eyes off him. My mind scrambled desperately for a way out. Suddenly, the man started moving toward me, his steps quick and determined. Instinct took over. I ran. I plunged into the darkness of the forest, my heart pounding wildly. The shadows swallowed me, disorienting me, but I didn't dare stop. Branches scratched my arms and face as I shoved through the foliage to force my way forward. I didn't care about the pain. I just wanted to get away from him. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I tripped over a root and fell face first, a sharp pain shooting through my ankle. I got up limping and driven by fear. In the distance, a faint silvery glow revealed the moonlight, guiding me between the trees. When I thought I couldn't run any farther, I suddenly stumbled into a clearing. To my relief, I could make out a small cabin with the lights on. Limping, I approached and pounded on the door in desperation. "Help! Please help me!" I cried, tears running down my face. The door opened, and an old man appeared in the doorway. Startled. "What's wrong?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. "There's someone behind me. He was chasing me." I blurted out between sobs, glancing over my shoulder. The man let me in immediately. He locked the door and looked out the window. "There's no one out there," he said, turning back to me. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded hard, still trembling. "Yes, I saw him. He was there. He was following me." The old man sighed and nodding slowly and offered me a blanket. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." I thanked him quietly, finally feeling a little safer. I sat on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, while he stayed nearby, keeping an eye on the door. Despite my fear, exhaustion eventually overcame me, and I fell into a restless sleep. When morning came, the old man walked me back to the campsite. There was no sign of the stranger. I packed my things in silence and left the forest, swearing to myself I would never camp alone again. The solitude and peace I had once longed for had turned into a nightmare I would never be able to forget. Story 4. Working as a nurse in a psychiatric hospital can be one of the most challenging experiences there is. I've always considered myself a calm and steady person, but one night something happened that shook me to my core. It was an experience I will never forget. It was a Thursday night. The sun had already set, and the moonlight cast long, twisted shadows along the building's walls. I was working the night shift at St. Anne Mental Health Center, a place that, over the years, had housed many troubled souls. Some patients were quiet and gentle, others were violent and unpredictable. The building itself reflected its history, old, with creaking floors and narrow hallways that seemed to whisper with the wind. My shift started at 8 p.m. The air was cool, and the night passed with apparent normality. I did my usual rounds and checking on the patients, making sure they were comfortable and that they had taken their medication. Everything seemed in order, though there was something in the air, a strange feeling, as if someone or something were watching me. Around midnight, I was at the nurse's station, updating patient records. The desk lamp was my only source of light. Suddenly, I heard a very faint whisper. I froze, listening closely. It was so soft that I thought I might have imagined it. I shook my head and kept writing, but a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer, and what I heard made my blood run cold. "Emily, Emily." My heart started pounding. I stood up and looked around, but there was no one there. The hallway in front of the station was empty. I tried to convince myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't calm down. I decided to do another round to clear my head and check on the patients. As I walked down the dark hallways, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I reached the end of the corridor, where room 307 was. That's where Mrs. Thompson stayed, a patient known for her quiet demeanor. She almost never spoke. She spent the day staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. As I got closer, I noticed the door was slightly open. I pushed it carefully and stepped inside. Mrs. Thompson was, as always, sitting by the window, but something was different. She was humming a strange melody, a song I had never heard before. Her eyes were fixed on the moon shining outside, as if she were in a trance. "Mrs. Thompson," I said gently. She didn't respond. I moved closer and touched her shoulder. Immediately, she stopped humming and turned her head toward me. Her eyes were wide, and she whispered in a trembling voice, "They're here." "Who?" I asked, and trying to stay calm. "The shadows," she said. "They come at night. They whisper. They want to take me." A shiver ran through me. I didn't know what to say. I tried to reassure her, but she kept repeating the same words over and over. "The shadows. The shadows." I left the room with my heart racing. As I walked back to the station, the lights began to flicker, and then the whispers returned, louder than before. "Emily, Emily." The echo of my name rang down the hallway. I quickened my pace, feeling my pulse pounding in my chest. When I reached the station, the lights went out completely. Everything sank into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the gloom, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The whispers were still there, multiplying, as if dozens of invisible voices were surrounding me. "Emily, come play with us. Join us." An icy wind swept through the room, sending the papers on the desk flying. The flashlight began to flicker, and for an instant I thought I saw a shadow move at the edge of the light. With trembling hands, I tried to steady the flashlight. I needed answers. I ran to the small room where the security monitors were and turned on the screens. Most of the cameras showed empty hallways and vacant rooms, but one image made me hold my breath. On the monitor aimed at the hallway in front of room 307, the shadows were moving. They had no defined shape, dark masses sliding slowly toward the nurse's station, toward me. I felt the air leave my lungs. I watched in horror as they drew closer and closer. I grabbed the phone to call for help, but the line was dead. The whispers intensified, completely wrapping around me. "Emily, join us. Forever." I backed into a corner, pressing the flashlight against my chest. A freezing cold enveloped me as the shadows reached the doorway. The door opened slowly, with a long and drawn-out creak. The room grew even darker, and the whispers became deafening. And then when the lights came back on, the shadows vanished. Silence returned. I stood there shaking, breathing in short, broken gasps, trying to understand what had just happened. I knew one thing. That wasn't normal. There was something evil in that place, something that fed on the fear of the patients and the staff. The rest of the night passed like a dream. Somehow I finished my shift, though the terror never left me for a second. When morning came, I gave my report to the day nurse and left the hospital as fast as I could. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would have believed me? That night changed everything for me. I understood that there are things that can't be explained, forces beyond human understanding. I never accepted another night shift at St. Anne's. And even now, sometimes, when everything is silent, I think I hear those whispers again. Emily. Story 5. I had just moved into my new apartment. It was a small but cozy place, perfect for me. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the living room had a large window that let in plenty of light during the day. After living with roommates for so long, I felt happy to finally have my own space. One afternoon, after unpacking most of the boxes, I decided to relax a little. I made a cup of tea and settled onto the couch with a good book. The apartment was completely silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock hanging on the wall. As I read, I started to feel drowsy. The warmth of the tea and the comfort of the couch made my eyelids heavy. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a noise. It was a faint scraping, as if someone were gently scratching at the front door. I sat up, my heart beating a little faster. It must be the wind, I thought, trying to calm myself. I tried to ignore it and went back to my book. But the sound returned, this time louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was trying to force the lock from outside. I set the book aside and tiptoed to the door. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. The hallway was dark and completely empty. I waited a few seconds, holding my breath, until the noise stopped. I'm imagining things, I told myself, trying to sound convincing. I went back to the couch, though I could no longer focus on reading. My mind kept returning to that strange sound. I turned on the TV, hoping the background noise would help calm my nerves. A couple of hours passed, and little by little, I started to relax. I decided to go to bed. I brushed my teeth, put on my pajamas, and slipped under the blankets. The bed was warm and comfortable, and soon I fell deeply asleep. But in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. At first, I didn't know why, until I heard it again. The same scraping at the door, this time more intense and frantic. My heart began to hammer in my chest. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 2:30 a.m. I sat up in bed, listening closely. The sound continued, and now I could also hear the doorknob rattling, as if someone were trying to force it open. Panic washed over me. Should I call the police, or try to scare him off by yelling? My hands trembled as I dialed 911. The operator answered, and I whispered to explain what was happening. In a calm voice, she assured me officers were already on the way and told me to stay quiet and not to hang up. I stayed with the phone pressed to my ear, gripping it tightly, listening to her reassuring voice. Meanwhile, the noise at the door kept getting worse. I could hear heavy breathing and a low, hoarse voice murmuring something unintelligible. It felt like an eternity until I heard sirens in the distance. The sound seemed to scare the intruder, because the noises stopped immediately. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. I didn't move. I was too terrified. A few minutes passed before a loud knock sounded at the door. "Police," a voice announced. I got up slowly, my legs shaking and my heart still racing. I opened the door and saw two officers standing in front of me, their faces serious and concerned. I told them everything that had happened. They quickly searched the apartment and the hallway, but they didn't find anyone. "Whoever it was, they're gone now," one of them said. "We'll patrol for a while in case they come back." I thanked them, feeling a little safer with their presence. They stayed nearby for almost an hour, watching the area, and then told me to call if anything else happened. When they left, I locked the door and checked every window twice. Despite their reassuring words, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every sound in the building made me jump. I couldn't stop imagining the intruder returning, trying to get in again. The next morning, I called the building manager and told him what had happened. He promised to review the security camera footage and improve the hallway lighting. As for me, I decided to replace the lock with a stronger one. Days passed, and although nothing happened again, the feeling of being watched never left me. Every night I heard noises, creaks, whispers, soft footsteps. But when I got up to check, there was no one there. I tried to go on with my life, but the fear stayed with me. I lived in constant alertness, always looking over my shoulder. I hoped that one day I could feel safe in my own home again. But for now, the memory of that night still haunted me. The intruder had vanished without a trace, leaving only fear and unanswered questions. And even though the police assured me there was no longer any danger, I can't help but think, what if he comes back? What if he never really left? And what exactly was he looking for that night? Story 6. My name is Tom, and I work as a delivery driver for a small restaurant called Maggie's Place. I've been doing this job for a few months, and until that night, I'd never had any trouble. But that night was different. It was a night I will never forget. It was a cold, late October evening, just a few days before Halloween. The sky was covered in thick clouds, and the moon hid behind them, casting everything in an unsettling gloom. I was just about to finish my shift when the restaurant phone rang, an order for a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. Nothing unusual, except for one thing, the address. It didn't sound familiar at all. I checked the map on my phone and saw it was in a part of town I almost never went to, an old street called Maple Avenue. I didn't think much of it. I packed the order, put on my jacket, grabbed the bag of food, and headed out to the car. The drive was longer than expected. As I went farther, the streets became lonelier and darker. Finally, I turned onto Maple Avenue. It was an old street, lined with enormous trees and even larger houses. But something about the atmosphere wasn't right. There wasn't a single car parked anywhere, and most of the houses were dark, with an abandoned feel to them. Number 103 was at the end of the street. It was an old, run-down house, with peeling paint and broken windows. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the gate creaked as I pushed it open to go in. I walked up the path to the front door and rang the bell. The sound echoed through the empty house. I waited a few seconds, but no one answered. I knocked again, this time harder. Nothing. I was about to turn around when a voice called from upstairs. "I'm coming." I looked up and caught sight of a shadowy figure in one of the second-floor windows. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt relieved knowing someone was home. I waited on the porch, unholding the bag of food. Minutes passed, then no one came down. "Hello, your order is here," I called out loudly. Silence. I pulled out my phone and checked the address. It was correct. I tried calling the number on the order, but it went straight to voicemail. I started to feel more and more uneasy. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw an elderly woman standing on the sidewalk, watching me with a furrowed brow. "Looking for someone, young man?" she asked. "Yes," I said, pointing at the house. "I have a delivery for here, number 103, but no one's answering." The woman's eyes widened, and she slowly shook her head. "No one lives there, son," she said in a low voice. "That house has been abandoned for years. It's haunted." A chill ran down my spine. "Haunted? Are you sure?" She nodded firmly. "They say you can hear voices, and you can see shadows in the windows, but there's no one there. That house was left empty after the family who lived there died in a fire." I didn't know what to say. The old woman spoke with complete seriousness, and the house really did look like it had been dead for a long time. I looked back toward the porch, my stomach tightening. So who had placed the order? I decided to leave the food on the step and go. As I walked away toward my car, the voice came again, this time louder. "I'm coming." I turned sharply. The porch was empty. There was no one in the windows, only silence. I ran to the car, yanked the door open, and sped off. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. When I got back to the restaurant, Maggie, the owner, noticed my pale face and asked what was wrong. I told her everything. She listened quietly, then let out a sigh. "Maple Avenue, you said?" she asked. I nodded. "I've heard stories about that place. That house has been abandoned for more than 10 years. It was probably a phone prank." A prank? It didn't feel like that. It had been too real, too vivid. I finished my shift as best I could and went home, but I couldn't sleep. The voice, the figure in the window, the old woman's warning, everything replayed in my mind over and over again. Days later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up information about the house at 103 Maple Avenue. I found old newspaper articles. A fire had destroyed the house 15 years earlier. A family of 4 had died trapped in the flames. Since then, the house had remained deserted. I don't know who or what I encountered that night, but I've never gone back to Maple Avenue. Every time I pass near that area, a chill runs down my spine, and whenever I hear someone say, "I'm coming," I can't help but remember that night, the abandoned house, and the shadow that watched me from the window. Story 7. It was a cold autumn afternoon when my friends and I decided to explore the old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. We had always heard stories about strange creatures and chilling apparitions in that place, but curiosity was stronger than fear. Tristan, Bobby, Sarah, and I thought it would be fun to find out whether any of those legends were true. The factory was a huge, decaying building with broken windows and rusty metal doors. As we approached, the wind blew through the empty corridors, creating an eerie howl that made my skin crawl. We slipped through a gap in the fence and went inside, our flashlights casting long shadows on the cracked walls. "Let's check out the elevator shaft," Tristan suggested. He had always been the bravest one among us, or maybe the most reckless. Either way, we followed him through the dark hallways. When we reached the shaft, Tristan leaned forward to look down. "I think I see something," he whispered. I stepped closer and tried to focus my eyes. For an instant, I thought I could make out a faint silhouette, like the figure of a person down there, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "It must be a trick of the light," I said, trying to convince myself as much as everyone else. Bobby, always the skeptic, let out a nervous laugh. "You guys are imagining things. Ghosts and monsters don't exist." We kept exploring, moving through the different floors and rooms of the factory. Everything was covered in rusted machines, broken furniture, and piles of debris. The air was heavy, full of dust, and every step we took echoed in the silence. Suddenly, Bobby stopped. "Did you hear that?" he asked quietly. We stood still, holding our breath. A faint whisper or creak sounded in the distance, like something sliding quickly across the floor. "It's probably rats," Sarah said, though her voice was shaking. We continued forward, but now there was an invisible tension between us. In one of the largest rooms, we found what looked like an improvised camp, old blankets, empty cans, and a small ring of stones with traces of ash. "Looks like someone's been living here," I said. "Maybe a drifter," Tristan replied. "That would explain the noises and the figure we saw." We decided we'd had enough and started heading back, but before we reached the exit, Bobby pointed at something. "Look," he said, his voice trembling. At the end of the hallway, a dark figure darted across, so fast it was just a blur. "Did you see that?" he asked, his face pale. "There's someone here." Sarah swallowed hard. We picked up our pace, our hearts pounding in our chests. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. We turned and we saw it. A tall, thin shadow stood at the end of the hallway, with eyes that glowed in the dim light. Its fingers were long and bony, and it moved with an unnatural slowness. "Run!" Tristan shouted. He didn't have to say it twice. We sprinted, our footsteps thundering through the empty building as the figure followed us. When we reached the stairs, I couldn't help looking back. There it was, motionless, watching us. And those eyes, they felt like they were staring straight through my soul. We burst out of the factory, panting and shaking, and we didn't stop running until we reached the main road, far away from that sinister building. We finally stopped, struggling to catch our breath, eyes wide, trying to process what we had just experienced. "Maybe it was just a person," I said, though I didn't even believe it myself. The way it moved, those eyes, it didn't seem human. Bobby nodded, though his face was still tense and pale. "Yeah, maybe, but it didn't feel like that." Tristan, usually so confident, stayed silent. "I don't know what it was," he finally murmured, "but I'm never going back there again." Sarah shivered. "Me neither. That place is cursed." On the way home, and we tried to laugh and to brush it off, to pretend we hadn't seen what we saw. But deep down, we all knew something truly strange had happened that night. Something that had no explanation. And even though years have passed, sometimes I still think about that factory. When I hear unexplained noises in the dark, or think I see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, I remember those glowing eyes and the feeling of being watched. Some things are better left unexplored, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 8. It was a dark, stormy night. Rain hammered against the large windows of the old, creaky hotel where I worked. My name is Alex, and I'm the night front desk clerk at the Moonlight Inn. That hotel had seen better days. Its carpets, once a bright red, were now worn and faded, and the wallpaper was peeling in several places. That night there were only a few guests, most of them already asleep in their rooms. I sat behind the front desk, listening to the constant pounding of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Even so, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Something wasn't right. Everything was too quiet, too still. The wall clock marked the seconds with a deafening tick-tock, stretching time as if the hours weren't moving forward. Suddenly, the silence broke. The front door opened slowly, letting out a long, drawn-out creak. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from his long, dark coat and his wide-brimmed hat. His face stayed in shadow, but I could make out piercing eyes staring straight at me. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound calm. "How can I help you?" The man took a step forward, leaving a trail of water on the floor. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, setting it on the counter. "I need a room," he said in a low, hoarse voice. The sound of it sent a chill down my spine. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," he answered sharply, "but I need a room now." There was something about him that unsettled me. His clothes looked expensive but outdated, as if he had stepped out of another era. I had the strange feeling I'd seen his face before, but I couldn't remember where. "I need to see some ID," I said, trying to follow hotel protocol. The man hesitated for a moment, but finally handed me his driver's license. I glanced at it quickly. His name was Jack Harrison. I gave it back and noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Room 13 is available," I told him, handing him the key. "It's the last one on the ground floor." Jack took the key without a word and walked down the dimly lit hallway. I watched him go, a growing knot of unease twisting in my stomach. The hours passed slowly. Outside, and the rain kept falling without mercy, and the wind howled around the building. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept returning to that guest. Something about him didn't fit. Out of curiosity, I decided to look up his name online. When I saw the results, my blood turned to ice. An article came up from a few years earlier about a man named Jack Harrison, wanted for a series of violent crimes. He had vanished without a trace, and the police still considered him dangerous. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and dialed 911. In a voice that was almost a whisper, I explained the situation to the operator. She told me to stay calm. Officers were on the way. I hung up and tried to steady myself. The minutes dragged like hours. I could hear the rain, the wind, the groan of the old building, and the echo of my own heartbeat pounding hard. Finally, I heard the distant sound of sirens drawing closer. 2 police officers entered the hotel, their expressions serious. "Where is he?" one of them asked. "In room 13, I replied, pointing down the hallway. They nodded and moved quickly and quietly. I followed at a distance, my heart slamming in my chest. One of the officers knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, this is the police. We need to speak with you." Silence. He knocked again, harder. "Mr. Harrison, open the door." Nothing. The other officer gestured to me. "Do you have a master key?" I nodded and handed it over with trembling hands. The officer inserted the key, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. His flashlight swept the room, and my heart stopped. The room was empty, the bed untouched, no suitcase, no clothes, nothing. Only the window was open, letting the rain blow in and soak the carpet. The officers looked at each other. "Are you sure this was the room?" one asked. "Yes," I stammered. "I gave him the key myself. I saw him go in." They searched everywhere but found no trace of Jack Harrison. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "Call us if you see him again," one of them said, handing me a card. "And keep the doors locked tonight." I nodded, still in shock. They left, and the hotel fell back into absolute silence. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking. Where had he gone? How did he disappear so fast? I checked the security cameras, Mike, but there was no record of him leaving the building. He simply wasn't there anymore. At dawn, the rain finally stopped. The rest of the staff arrived for their shift, and I told them what had happened. They were just as baffled as I was. To this day, nobody knows what happened to Jack Harrison. Some say he's still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. All I know is that I'll never forget that stormy night at the Moonlight Inn, or the strange man who arrived soaking wet and disappeared without a trace. Story 9. I was 16 years old when my mom, my sister Lisa, and I decided to take a road trip across the country. It was a long journey, but we were excited to see new places. Lisa was 20 at the time, and we had been planning the trip for months. We packed our bags, filled up the car, and hit the road. We had been driving for several days, taking turns behind the wheel. Even though it was late, all of us were awake and alert. We were driving along a lonely road, an endless highway in the middle of nowhere, when we realized we needed gas and a break. The next rest stop was the only one available for more than 200 miles, so we had no choice. We decided to stop there. The moment we pulled into the rest area parking lot, something felt wrong. It was too dark, too silent, different from any other place we had stopped before. We saw a van full of teenagers parked by the gas pumps, and in front of us there was a small gray car with 2 young men standing beside it. The teenagers looked nervous, trying to get the gas pump to work without success. Finally, they climbed back into their vehicle in a hurry and drove off. muttering something about how the place gave them a bad feeling. My mom and Lisa got out to use the bathroom, while I stayed in the car. I couldn't take my eyes off the two men by the gray car. They didn't move. They didn't talk. They didn't even use their phones. They were simply there, motionless, like statues. A chill ran down my spine. I wished Mom and Lisa would come back quickly. After what felt like an eternity, I saw them running out of the building, their faces pale and their eyes full of fear. They jumped into the car in a rush. At that moment, the two men slowly turned their heads toward us. They didn't move their bodies, only their necks. And then we saw it, their eyes. They were black, but not like the dark eyes of a normal person. No, they were empty, without any reflection, like a hole in reality, a place where light simply didn't exist. All three of us saw it, and the terror froze us in place. My mother started the engine with trembling hands, and we sped out of there as fast as we could. We didn't stop driving until we reached the next city. When we finally felt safe, we tried to understand what had happened. We checked the maps, both paper maps and Google Maps, but we couldn't find the rest area anywhere. It was as if it had never existed. We even asked some locals if they knew of a strange gas station or a rest stop along that stretch of highway, but no one knew what we were talking about. It was as if the place had been erased from reality. Since then, we've traveled that same route several times, and we never saw that place again. It was as if it had been a ghost, a shared illusion. But the three of us know what we saw, and that memory still haunts us. That night changed us forever. We don't talk about it much, but I can see the fear in my mother's eyes and in Lisa's every time we pass that stretch of road. It's a memory that doesn't fade, an indelible mark of the mystery that lurks out there in the dark corners of the road, where the unknown is still watching us. Story 10. I work as a delivery driver, and my shift starts at 10 at night. It's a tough job, especially at those hours, but it pays well. I usually deliver food all over the city, driving my old car through quiet streets. Most of the time, the night is calm, but sometimes it can be strangely unsettling. One Friday night, around midnight, I got an order coming from an area of the city I didn't recognize. The address was strange, and it took me longer than usual to find it. When I finally arrived, I saw a large mold house at the end of a dark, narrow driveway. There were no street lights, and the place looked abandoned. The windows were broken, and the paint was peeling off the walls in flakes. A chill ran through my body. Still, I had a job to do. I parked the car, took the bag of food, and approached the house. The silence was absolute. No murmuring, no sound of wind, no rustle of leaves. Only the echo of my own footsteps on the damp ground. I knocked on the door. With a creak, it opened by itself. I stood still, hesitating. Then I heard a voice from inside. "Come in." It was a soft, low voice, almost a whisper. I stepped inside, and the door closed on its own behind me. The interior was dark, barely lit by a few candles flickering along the hallway. The air was cold and damp, and a smell of dust and mold filled everything. I walked slowly, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. At the end of the corridor, a half-open door let a faint light spill out. That's where the voice was coming from. "Bring it here," it said again, this time closer. I pushed the door open cautiously. The room was almost completely dark, except for a single candle burning on a table in the corner. The flame flickered, throwing long, warped shadows that twisted along the walls. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel a presence. Someone was there with me. "Where do you want me to leave the food?" I asked, and trying to stay calm. "Here," the voice answered, closer still. almost right beside my ear. I moved toward the table, my heart pounding hard. I set the bag down, and as I did, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall and thin, with long, bony fingers. The candlelight illuminated her face, and I swallowed a scream. It was a woman, but her skin was pale, almost grayish, and her eyes were two empty sockets, dark as bottomless wells. She smiled slowly, showing yellowy sharp teeth. "Thank you for bringing the food," she said in a hoarse, malicious voice. "Stay for a while, won't you?" I took a step back, fear taking hold of me. "I have to go. I still have deliveries," I stammered. She moved a little closer, never taking her empty eyes off mine. "No, stay. We rarely get visitors. It's very lonely here." My mind searched desperately for a way out. The door was behind her, blocked by her body. Then I remembered the phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and pretended to look at the screen. "I have to go. My boss is calling me." I lied, trying to sound convincing. She tilted her head, studying me as if she wanted to see inside me. For a few seconds, I feared she wouldn't let me leave, but then she stepped back, forming that disturbing smile again. "All right, but you'll come back, won't you?" she said with fake sweetness. "Sure," I replied, not believing a word of it. "I'll come back." I quickly turned toward the door and stepped out into the hallway. Behind me, I heard a hollow, icy laugh, so chilling it froze me in place for an instant. I didn't dare look back. I ran down the hallway and out the front door, not stopping until I reached my car. I got in, started the engine with trembling hands, and sped down the dark driveway. Before turning onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There she was, standing in the doorway, watching me with those empty eyes, black as the abyss. I hit the gas, without looking back. When I finally reached a lit street, I pulled over to catch my breath. What had that been? Who was that woman? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had barely escaped something terrible. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I finished my deliveries, but my mind stayed trapped in that house and in the woman with the monstrous smile. When my shift ended, I got home, collapsed onto my bed exhausted and terrified, unable to sleep. The next morning, I told my friends what had happened. They laughed and said I must have imagined it, that I was tired or spooked. Maybe they were right, but deep down I knew the truth. I saw what I saw, and since then, I never went back to that part of the city.